Welcome to today's Let It Hatch on the Slight Edge by Jeff Olson, who claims that there are 3 steps to your dreams. Number 1, envisioning. Number 2, cultivating a burning desire by means of auto-suggestion. It gets pretty mystical. And number 3, making a plan. Now this plan might not be the one that actually leads you to your dreams, but you need to make it and step out on it. It might involve your phone falling out the window when you're trying to film the sunrise. Stick at it, Jeff claims. The truth about breakthroughs is that they do happen, but not out of thin air. They are grown like a crop, planted, cultivated, and ultimately harvested. The problem is, he claims, that in our culture, we're trained to think we can skip over the middle step and leap directly from plants to harvest. We even have a term for it. We call it a quantum leap. He claims it's a myth. We'll take a plunge into Olson in about 3 minutes. First of all, I'd like to take us on a journey through these first 3 weeks of Into the Field with those 3 ideas in mind. So first of all, envisioning. And if you remember, in I think the 3rd video, we encountered these 7 E's and an egg. Expectation that what I am envisioning eventually emerges, enabling everyone who wants to be involved, including you, including me, including everyone, to evolve. So that's a vision that I had for Into the Field, and then I made this plan, and we stuck to this plan for week 1. If you remember, I was talking about the idea of surrender. The tree surrenders apples, and I was drawing then on Michael Beckwith, whose book I have just here. Let's put this back here as it was for the tree. According to Beckwith, we live in a universe where nothing remains static. In order to fully evolve, the spirit seed at the core of our being must be cultivated. We too must till the soil of our consciousness with spiritual tools and inner nutrients that enable us to fully deliver our gifts, talents, and skills. Now this is interesting, since for Beckwith, who speaks of the tree surrendering fruit, we encounter 3 analogous emphases when it comes to manifesting. Number 1, clarity regarding what we're envisioning. Number 2, working with other parts of the consciousness besides the thinking mind. Through inner work, our consciousness becomes a fertile condition for our conscious participation in our evolution, he claims. And number 3, there's this same emphasis on making a plan. There are spiritual practices that he proposes. If you follow these, you might achieve spiritual liberation. This brings us back to the ideas about teaching and learning that we first encountered in week 1's Let It Hatch video. That's where we met Tom Tulliver, a boy whose mind seemed particularly impervious to the classics and geometry, which his teacher imagined metaphorically as ploughs and harrows that needed to be applied to the mind if there was going to be any subsequent crop. Now, the source that we tapped for wisdom to help us think critically about what was going on in that scenario is Metaphors We Live by the neurobiologists Lakoff and Johnson. And they claim that metaphor is not just a matter of language, that is, of mere words. We shall argue that, on the contrary, human thought processes are largely metaphorical. And this, I was suggesting, was the problem with that teacher's way of thinking about what he was doing. It wasn't conscious enough. He wasn't grappling with the fact that when Tom seems to be allergic to the classics and geometry, metaphorically, it might make more sense to think of the mind as an intellectual stomach. That's why in week 2, we considered the garden of the mind. Is the mind its own place, we asked? Perhaps more like a walled garden than an open field. Countering the idea that the mind is its own place, unaffected by that which is walled off outside it, we discovered the brain to be peopled by a motley crew, including a smoke detector, the amygdala, which is hypersensitive to that which is outside us. We also discovered, most importantly, that the part of the brain that's responsible for making plans for action, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, has no direct communication with the limbic brain, which includes that smoke detector. That's why this watchtower, the medial prefrontal cortex, was so important. It can communicate with the planning part of the brain. We also learned about the autonomic nervous system in week 2. And we learned that the sympathetic branch is like the accelerator for the body, and the parasympathetic, meaning against emotions, is like the brake. We then turn to Wim Hof. Wim Hof claims that when the breath gets into the brain's electricity, it affects our neurological activity in a profound way. All your brain needs is a little biochemical nourishment. If you use his method enough, he claims, you will become the light rebalancing of parasympathetic sympathetic nervous system. This week, in week 3 of Into the Field, we've transitioned from thinking about blue things to green things, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and frogs. We're putting plans in their place, recognizing the virtue of beginning with one, but also of departing from one, as we've done this week. We'll have to wait for week 4 for Mr. Hill meets Mr. Rogers, followed by A Let It Hatch on Think and Grow Inner Riches. Hopefully, the next couple of minutes will give you a sense of what form that meeting of Fred and Napoleon might take. Something that Olson highlights just as much as Beckwith is that things are constantly changing, as you can see. Let's now revisit our frog story one last time and see what we can harvest from the slight edge without losing sight of our 7 E's vision. This image from page 40 of The Slight Edge encapsulates what it's all about. For Olson, we all have a simple choice to make, and it's between, on the one hand, simple, productive actions repeated consistently over time, or, on the other, simple errors in judgment repeated consistently over time. Olson claims that most people are like the fatalistic frog, played by me in these clothes, who couldn't see that his insignificant little paddling motions might actually churn cream into butter. Back to quantum leaps. Now, the frogs think that they're making a quantum leap when they discover the milk. It's the most delicious, they're happy, it's the most delicious milk that they've ever encountered. Olson clarifies in chapter 6 that quantum leaps do happen, but only as the end result of a lengthy, gradual build-up of consistently applied effort. So it's not a quantum leap when the frog leaps into the pail and discovers the cream and is happy. It's a quantum leap when all of that paddling pays off and the frog is able to escape from its doom. Olson's philosophy is all about having faith in the process of simple, positive actions repeated over time. The faith that miracles do happen if you know when to trust the process and keep churning the cream. It all comes down to the question, can we learn habits of thought and action that will allow you to choose wisely? So here's Beckwith, by contrast, on patterns of thought and action. They develop over the course of a lifetime. Some of these patterns support us, while others undermine us. Upon examining our everyday patterns, if we are honest, we will notice how, beginning with our morning routine until the time we go to sleep, we consistently use one muscle: repetition. So this is where it gets interesting, because there's some slight divergence from the slight edge mentality. Beckwith says, just as seeds need the proper soil, water, and nutrients to grow into its perfect expression, so are we to nourish the soil of our consciousness in order to evolve into our soul's expanding potential. He talks of flexing the inner muscle of choice rather than repetition. Back to these 3 simple, essential steps to achieving any goal. Envisioning, autosuggestion, starting with a plan. The other frog, the frog in the hood, does none of these. Yes, he has a vision of escaping from the pail, but he doesn't write it down. He doesn't consciously formulate a plan. He doesn't look at his vision every day, keeping it in his face, soaking his subconsciousness in it. He panics. His smoke detector's going off. He's swimming around in circles, thinking he's going to die. Who's to say what's a good or a bad habit? Who's to say that continuing on that path is going to be what enables liberation? The slight edge is about your awareness. It is about you making the right choices, the choices that serve you and empower you. It's not a question of your mood or your feelings, and it's not a question of willpower. It's a question of simply knowing. But can we simply know which habits are going to lead to which results? On the one hand, part of what makes Olson's philosophy so rich and helpful is that it's grounded on a pretty rich understanding of the brain. On the other hand, we can go further than Olson thanks to the body keeps the score. This is what Olson has to say about the brain. The human brain is the most complex, powerful information processing device known. But there is something about the brain that most people don't realize, and that is where in the brain the real power lies. Now, inspired by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, he's going to claim it's the subconscious mind. This is why he recommends doing things like rereading your goal at night. But what if we have practices like mind movie technology or the Wim Hof method, which we can use to regulate our autonomic nervous system? Such practices could be used to go beyond the ideas of right doing and wrong doing formed by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, enabling outcomes which we couldn't mechanically predetermine to occur. Wim Hof appears to have just started crawling down there. Why did he just start crawling? What a weirdo. Well, in a section of The Slight Edge called Baby Steps, Olson highlights that all infants are successful. As infants, we are all masters. He highlights that we all learn how to crawl and then to walk. We don't give up. We don't lose faith. So on the one hand, he's saying, learn to be more like the child again. The child which has faith. The child which is not held back by skepticism about what can be done. Only a little bit later, though, he highlights, psychologists have found crawling is one of the most important activities we ever accomplish because it profoundly affects the neurological wiring of the brain and its capacity to learn. The right hand, left leg, left hand, right leg rhythm of alternation acts upon our nervous systems like the surf upon a coastline, developing it, shaping it, and preparing it for all sorts of more sophisticated levels of learning and awareness later in life. Olson isn't really accounting for the limbic brain. Some of the patterns in which we get stuck, there's no way of getting unstuck from unless the relationship between the smoke detector and the watchtower is cultivated. And we can't do that with the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which does the planning. We can do that through things like the Wim Hof method and equivalents to crawling, such as working on the relationship between the left and the right hemisphere of the brain through certain energy-conscious physical movements. Now, it's much harder to hold your breath for a long period of time if you've just been acting as a frog and then crawling around. He's now pointing over in this direction, which I'm taking as a sign that I should draw to a close and highlight that next week we'll be continuing to draw upon this understanding of the brain to put plans in their place. I told you not to do that.